The Des Moines city dump greeted the dawn of a February morning with thick fog and the pungent smell of decaying waste. Garbage truck number 17 slowly entered the grounds, preparing for another unloading. Driver Albert King had been working this route for 20 years and knew every corner of the dump, but what he saw at 7 o'clock on the morning of February 23rd made him grab the radio with trembling hands. A human body was visible among the piles of construction debris and old car tires. The man was lying on his back with his arms spread out, as if someone had carelessly thrown him among the piles of junk. His dark suit contrasted sharply with the gray-brown mass of waste around him. Even from a distance of 30 meters, Albert could tell that the man was dead. Detective Karen Davis received the call at 8:15 a.m. as she was finishing her second cup of coffee at the Central District Police Station. A 42-year-old woman with short curly hair and attentive brown eyes. She had been with the police for 18 years and had seen her share of dead bodies. But every new case required a fresh perspective and a methodical approach. Her partner, Detective Patrick Nelson, was already waiting by the police car, sipping coffee from a paper cup. The 38-year-old man of average height with a neatly trimmed beard had a rare gift for finding common ground with people in the most difficult situations. In 10 years of working together, Davis and Nelson had formed an excellent team. The drive to the dump took 20 minutes. The area was already cordoned off by patrol cars, and forensic experts had begun their preliminary examination. The detectives walked past the yellow tape and headed toward the spot where the body had been found. The February wind cut through them, and the smell of the dump mixed with the metallic scent of approaching snow. The body belonged to a black man about 35 years old. He was dressed in an expensive dark blue suit, a white shirt, and a blue tie. His feet were adorned with polished leather shoes. Everything indicated that during his lifetime, this man had no connection to the places where corpses are usually found. Dr. Michelle Adams, a medical examiner with 15 years of experience, had already conducted a preliminary examination. She looked up when she saw the detectives approaching. "Male, between 30 and 40 years old," she reported, removing her rubber gloves. "One gunshot wound to the chest, presumably from a medium-caliber pistol. Death occurred last night between 6 and 10 p.m. The body was moved after death. He was definitely not killed here." Davis carefully examined the victim's clothing. The suit was expensive, most likely tailor-made. The tip of a silk handkerchief was visible in the breast pocket of the jacket. A gold watch of a well-known brand glinted on the left hand. A ring on the ring finger indicated that the man was married. "Is the wallet there?" "Yes, nothing's been touched," Adams replied. "Money, credit cards, license. The driver's license is in the name of Dominic Edward Jones, 35 years old, address 123 Walnut Street." Davis jotted the information down in her notebook. If the wallet was untouched, the robbery theory became less likely, although it was too early to rule it out completely. The examination of the crime scene did not yield many clues. The ground around the body had been trampled by equipment and landfill workers, and the footprints were almost impossible to read. No items that could belong to the killer were found. Forensic experts collected soil samples and photographed the site from all possible angles. "The body was clearly brought here by car," Nelson remarked, studying the access roads. "You couldn't carry it here on foot, especially at night." "Someone knew the area well," Davis agreed. "The dump is only open during the day, and there's no security at night. It's the perfect place to get rid of a body." The detectives questioned Albert King and 2 other workers who had been on the premises that morning. No one had seen anything suspicious the day before. Work at the dump stopped at 5 p.m., after which the area remained deserted until morning. At 10:30, the detectives went to the address listed on the victim's driver's license. The house on Walnut Street was a neat 2-story building in a quiet, middle-class neighborhood. The small garden in front of the house was well kept even in winter, and the driveway was neatly cleared of snow. Davis pressed the doorbell. A few seconds later, the door opened, and an attractive black woman in her 30s appeared. She was dressed in a housecoat, her hair pulled back in a casual bun. Her eyes betrayed a slight uneasiness at the sight of strangers. "Karen Jones?" Davis asked, showing her ID. "Yes, that's me. What's going on?" "We're detectives with the Des Moines Police Department. Can we come in?" The woman stepped aside to let them into the house. The living room was tastefully furnished, but without excess. Family photos hung on the walls, and Davis recognized the man from the dump in one of them. "Mrs. Jones, we have some sad news to share with you," Davis began in a soft tone. "This morning, the body of your husband, Dominic, was found." Karen Jones froze, as if she couldn't believe what she had heard. The color drained from her face. "What? What did you say?" she whispered. "Your husband is dead, Mrs. Jones. I'm so sorry." The woman staggered and grabbed the back of the chair. Nelson quickly went over to her and helped her sit down. Karen covered her face with her hands and her shoulders shook with sobs. "That's impossible. Dominic left for work yesterday as usual. He was supposed to be back for dinner, but he didn't come. I thought he had something urgent to do." The detectives gave the woman a few minutes to compose herself. Davis brought a glass of water from the kitchen. "Mrs. Jones, we understand how difficult this is, but we need to ask you a few questions," she said. "When was the last time you saw your husband?" Karen wiped her eyes with a napkin, trying to focus. "Yesterday morning at 7:30. He was having breakfast and getting ready for work. He said he had an important meeting with a client after lunch." "What time does he usually come home?" "Around 6:30, sometimes 7, but he sometimes stays late when he has a lot of work." "Did you try calling him?" "Yes, I called several times in the evening. At first the phone was unavailable and then it went straight to voicemail. I thought his battery had died." Nelson wrote down her statement, asking clarifying questions from time to time. Davis studied the layout of the house, trying to understand what the Joneses' family life was like. "Did your husband have any enemies? People who might have wanted to harm him?" Karen shook her head. "No, everyone loved him. Dominic worked at a law firm and had a good reputation. Of course, he dealt with all kinds of people in court, but he never mentioned any threats." "Was everything okay at home? Any family problems?" The woman hesitated for a moment, but then shook her head. "No, we were happy. Dominic worked hard to provide for our family." The detectives asked for the husband's relatives' contact information and obtained permission to examine his personal belongings. Dominic's study on the second floor was neatly arranged. Work documents were in folders, law books were on the shelves, and diplomas and certificates were on the walls. After talking to the widow, the detectives went to see the victim's mother. Gloria Jones lived in a small house in the eastern part of the city. The 60-year-old woman with gray hair and tired eyes met the news of her son's death with bitter stoicism. "I always feared something like this would happen," she said, sitting in her cramped living room. "Dominic worked too much and was constantly under stress. He had heart problems when he was younger." "Mrs. Jones, your son did not die of a heart attack," Davis said gently. "He was murdered." The old woman turned pale and clutched her heart. "Murdered? But who could—" "Dominic never hurt anyone. Are you aware of any conflicts in his life? Problems at work or at home?" Gloria shook her head, wiping away tears. "No, he was a good boy, a good husband. Karen adored him. The only thing that upset me—" She faltered. "What exactly?" "They didn't have children. I wanted grandchildren so badly. But Dominic said it wasn't the right time, that we needed to get our lives in order first." Next was the victim's sister, Rachel Jones Phillips. The 33-year-old nurse lived with her family in the suburbs. The news of her brother's death had shaken her to the core. "It's impossible," she repeated, rocking her 1-year-old son in her arms. "Dominic was a careful man. He never went to dangerous places." "Tell me about your brother's character," Nelson asked. "What was he like to live with?" "Ambitious, determined, sometimes maybe a little too focused on his career, but he was a good man, a caring husband." "How was his relationship with his wife?" Rachel paused for a moment. "Lately, they hadn't been appearing together at family gatherings as often. But I thought it was because of Dominic's work. They were going through a tough time at the firm." Had Karen changed in any way in recent months? She had become more withdrawn, sad. I asked her if everything was okay, but she just smiled and said she was tired from work. By evening, the detectives returned to the station to process the information they had gathered. Preliminary autopsy results confirmed that Dominic Jones had been killed by a single shot to the chest from a .38 caliber handgun. The time of death was between 5 p.m. and 8 p.m. the previous day. So far, everything points to a random attack, Nelson said, studying the records. Maybe he was trying to rob him, he resisted, and the situation got out of control. But his wallet was untouched, Davis objected, and the killer took the time to drive the body to a dump. That doesn't sound like panic after a failed robbery. Maybe something scared him off? Or maybe he was looking for something specific, not money. Davis nodded, but something bothered her. The wife's reaction seemed sincere, but some details didn't add up. Why wasn't Karen seriously concerned when her husband didn't come home? Why didn't she call the police? Tomorrow we'll talk to the victim's colleagues, she decided. Maybe we'll find some leads at work. The next morning, detectives Davis and Nelson headed downtown to the law firm of Harris & Associates. The 20-story glass and steel building towered over the business district of Des Moines, symbolizing success and prosperity. The firm's offices, where the late Dominic Jones had worked, were located on the 14th floor. The receptionist, an elderly white woman with neatly styled hair, greeted them with reserved politeness. Upon learning the purpose of their visit, she immediately escorted the detectives to managing partner Robert Harris. The gray-haired man in his 60s expressed his condolences and willingness to assist with the investigation. Dominic was one of our best lawyers, Harris said, seating the detectives in leather chairs in front of his massive desk. He specialized in corporate law and worked with major clients. His death is a huge loss for the firm. Did he have any conflicts with clients or colleagues? Davis asked. Nothing serious. Dominic was a professional, good at finding compromises. Of course, in our line of work, there are sometimes disagreements, but it never got to the point of threats. Harris gave the detectives a list of Dominic's colleagues and allowed them to talk to them. The first was Terrence Clark, whom the secretary introduced as the deceased's best friend. The 36-year-old man with short hair and attentive eyes worked in the office next door. Upon learning the purpose of the detective's visit, he suggested they talk in the conference room where no one would disturb them. "I can't believe Doma is gone," Terrence said, using his friend's childhood nickname. "We met at university where we studied law together. He was like a brother to me." "Tell me about his character, his habits," Nelson asked. "Dominic was always ambitious, wanted to succeed at any cost. He worked hard and often stayed late. Sometimes I told him he needed to spend more time with his family, but he said he was doing it for Karen's future." "How were his family relationships?" Terrence paused, as if weighing his words. They had been having problems in recent months. Dominic said that Karen had become irritable and often cried for no reason. He didn't understand what was going on. "Did he say anything specific?" "Well," Terrence hesitated again. "Dom mentioned that Karen had recently had an abortion. It was a difficult decision for both of them, but they felt they weren't ready for children yet." Davis glanced at her partner. Neither Karen nor her husband's relatives had mentioned the abortion the day before. Did Dominic say why they made that decision? "He said he wanted to become a partner in the firm first, to provide stability for the family. And Karen, well, she seemed to agree, although Dom admitted that it was very difficult for her." "When did this happen?" "A month and a half ago, no more. After that, Karen became completely withdrawn, and Dom became even more immersed in his work." Terrence stood up and walked over to the window, looking at the snow-covered streets below. "You know, I think because of these family problems, Dom and—" he faltered. "And what?" Davis asked insistently. "He started spending time with other people. I mean, he was having an affair." Terrence turned to the detectives, his eyes betraying his discomfort. "Dom never said anything directly, but I saw the signs. He started dressing differently, using a new cologne. Sometimes he would get personal phone calls and go out into the hallway to talk." "Do you have any idea who it might be?" "I think it was someone from our firm. Dom hardly ever socialized outside of work, except for a few old friends. And in the last few months, he had become particularly attentive to some of the female employees." "Can you name any names?" Terrence shrugged uncertainly. "Perhaps Nicole Brooks. She's a paralegal, a very attractive young woman. I saw them talking in the hallway several times, and there was clearly some chemistry between them." "Where can we find Miss Brooks?" "Her office is on the same floor, in the civil law section, but I don't know if it's worth it." Terrence looked concerned. I don't want to damage the reputation of the firm or Nicole. We're investigating a murder, Mr. Clark, Davis reminded him. Any information could be important. After talking to Terrence, the detectives headed to the civil law section. Nicole Brooks worked in a small office at the end of the corridor. The 28-year-old woman with shoulder-length brown hair and green eyes looked up from her documents when she saw the strangers at the door. Miss Brooks? We're detectives with the Des Moines Police Department, Davis said, showing his badge. We'd like to talk to you about Dominic Jones. Nicole's face changed instantly. The color drained from her cheeks, and fear appeared in her eyes. Dominic? What happened? You don't know? His body was found yesterday morning. He's dead. Nicole stood up abruptly, knocking over her chair. Her hands trembled as she grabbed the edge of the table. No, that's impossible. I saw him the day before yesterday. He was fine. Tears streamed down her cheeks, and she covered her face with her hands. Davis approached her, offering her some tissues. Miss Brooks, we need to ask you a few questions. Can we talk in a more private setting? Nicole nodded, unable to speak. The detectives led her to an empty conference room where she could compose herself. How long did you know Mr. Jones? Nelson asked gently. I've been working at the firm for 2 years. Dominic, Mr. Jones sometimes asked me for help with documents. Just a working relationship? Nicole began to cry again, shaking her head. No, we had a relationship. For 6 months. Tell me how it started. In the fall, we often worked late on a big case. Dominic would order dinner to the office and we would eat together. He would tell me about his plans and dreams. I could see that he was unhappy in his marriage. Did he talk about problems with his wife? Yes, all the time. Karen didn't understand him or support his career ambitions. Dominic felt lonely. Nicole wiped her eyes and looked at the detectives. He promised he would leave his wife. He said that he and Karen were practically strangers, living like neighbors. He was planning to file for divorce in the spring. Miss Brooks, we know that Mrs. Jones recently had an abortion. Did Dominic tell you about that? Nicole nodded, her face darkening. Yes, he did. It was his idea. What do you mean? Karen got pregnant in December. Dominic was terrified because we were already planning to be together. He said the baby would ruin everything, that it would be harder for him to get a divorce and start a new life. Davis felt her stomach tighten. The picture was starting to become clearer, and it was a far cry from the idol Karen had described the day before. He made his wife have an abortion? He didn't make her, but he insisted. He said they weren't financially ready, that it wasn't the right time. Karen resisted, but in the end, she agreed. And how did you feel about that? Nicole lowered her eyes. I understood that it would be better for us. But now I feel ashamed. That woman lost her child because of me. When was the last time you saw Dominic? The day before yesterday, on Monday. We met at a cafe near the office after work. He was excited, saying that everything was about to change. In what way? Dominic said he was ready to talk to his wife about divorce. He planned to do it over the weekend. We even discussed where we would live after his divorce. Did he mention any threats or conflicts? No, nothing like that. The only thing that worried him was how Karen would react. He was afraid she would make a scene and try to prevent the divorce. Did Dominic ever say that his wife knew about your relationship? Nicole shook her head. He was sure she didn't suspect anything. Karen wasn't interested in his work and didn't ask any unnecessary questions. Dominic said she lived in her own world. The detectives asked a few more questions and asked Nicole not to leave town without notifying them. The girl promised to cooperate and let them know if she remembered anything important. Leaving the office, Davis and Nelson exchanged opinions. The picture has changed dramatically, Nelson said. Now we have a motive for murder. The question is whether Karen knew about her husband's affair, Davis replied. And if she did, when did she find out? An abortion is a serious trauma for a woman, and if she later found out that her husband had forced her to get rid of the baby for his mistress, that could drive even the calmest person to extremes. The detectives decided to talk to a few more of Dominic's colleagues to get a more complete picture of his behavior in recent months. The HR secretary, Deborah Wilson, confirmed that she had noticed changes in Jones's behavior. He became more attentive to his appearance, said the 50-year-old woman. He started wearing more expensive suits and changed his hairstyle. And yes, I saw him talking to Nicole Brooks. There was definitely more than a working relationship between them. Did other employees notice anything? Office gossip is inevitable. Many people said that Dominic was having an affair with Nicole, but they were careful not to make their relationship public. How has Nicole changed in recent months? She became more confident and started dressing better. Several times I saw her wearing expensive jewelry that she didn't have before, most likely gifts from Dominic. Another colleague, lawyer Michael Richardson, said that Dominic had been on edge in recent weeks. He became more nervous and irritable. Last week, he even yelled at his secretary over something trivial, which he had never done before. Did he explain the reasons for his condition? He said that things were difficult at home. His wife was allegedly depressed after some kind of medical procedure. Dominic felt guilty, but didn't know how to help. By the end of the day, detectives had pieced together a fairly complete picture of the last months of Dominic Jones's life. A man dissatisfied with his marriage began an affair with a young colleague. When his wife became pregnant, he convinced her to have an abortion so that it wouldn't interfere with his plans to divorce and start a new life. In recent weeks, he had been preparing to talk to his wife about divorce. "We need to talk to Karen again," Davis said as they returned to the station. "She withheld some very important information from us yesterday. Maybe she just didn't want to discuss a painful subject," Nelson suggested. "Abortion is a private matter." Or she knew more than she was letting on. A woman's intuition is rarely wrong. If a husband has been seeing someone else for 6 months, his wife usually suspects something. You think she might have found out about his affair? It's possible, and if it happened soon after the abortion he forced her to have, we may have a murderer on our hands. They decided not to go to Karen's right away, but to give her another night. Tomorrow morning, when the initial shock of her husband's death had subsided a little, she might be more forthcoming. In addition, they needed to check some details of Nicole's testimony and take a closer look at Dominic's financial records. That evening, Davis sat in her apartment, mulling over the details of the case. The picture was becoming clearer, but many questions remained unanswered. The main one was whether Karen Jones knew about her husband's infidelity, and if so, what exactly had driven her to murder. The answer to that question would determine the course of the investigation. The next morning, Detectives Davis and Nelson decided to start the day with a visit to the doctor who had performed Karen Jones's abortion. Medical records obtained through a court order pointed to the clinic of Dr. Samuel Richards in the city center. It was a modern medical facility specializing in women's health. Dr. Richards, a 50-year-old man with graying temples and kind eyes, welcomed the detectives into his office. Diplomas and certificates attesting to his high qualifications hung on the walls. Upon learning the purpose of their visit, he looked concerned. "I remember Mrs. Jones," he said, leafing through her medical records. "The procedure was performed on January 8th, but I can't disclose any details without the relevant documents." "Dr. Richards, we're investigating a murder," Davis reminded him, showing him the court order. "Any information could be critical." The doctor studied the documents carefully and nodded. "All right, but I must emphasize that patient confidentiality is sacred to me. I am only speaking to you because this is a matter of criminal investigation." "Tell me about Mrs. Jones's condition during the procedure," Nelson asked. Dr. Richards leaned back in his chair, gathering his thoughts. "It was one of the most emotionally difficult cases I've ever had. Mrs. Jones clearly did not want to have an abortion. She cried from the moment she arrived at the clinic until the procedure was over." "What did her husband say?" "Mr. Jones insisted on the abortion. He cited financial reasons, talked about the timing being wrong and his career plans, but most importantly, he was very insistent, almost aggressive in his arguments." The doctor stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the snow-covered street. "You see, in my practice, many families come to me with difficult decisions, but usually spouses support each other, even if the choice is painful. Here, I saw a man who was literally forcing his wife to have an abortion against her will." "Did you try to intervene?" "I asked Mrs. Jones several times, in private, if she was sure about her decision. I offered her time to think it over, but she said every time that her husband was right, that they weren't ready for a child." How did she look after the procedure? Devastated. I've seen many women after abortions. Some feel relief, some feel sadness, but there is always an understanding that the choice was right. Mrs. Jones had nothing but inconsolable grief. The doctor returned to the table and opened the patient's file. I even referred her to a psychologist because I was afraid she would become depressed. I recommended family therapy. I don't know if they took my advice. How did Mr. Jones behave after the procedure? He looked relieved, even satisfied. He paid quickly and took his wife away. I remember thinking it was strange that their reactions were so different. Doctor, do your records indicate how far along she was in her pregnancy? Yes, 14 weeks. That's quite late for an elective abortion. Women usually make the decision earlier if they really don't want the baby. What does that mean? Most likely, Mrs. Jones had been hoping to keep the pregnancy for a long time. 14 weeks is when a woman is fully aware of her motherhood and can feel the baby moving. Losing a baby at this stage is especially difficult. Having confirmed that the abortion was forced, the detectives went to Karen Jones's house. They needed to talk to her again, but this time with the new information in mind. Arriving at the house on Walnut Street, they noticed that the newspapers were still lying at the entrance and there were no lights on in the windows. Davis rang the doorbell and waited. No one answered. She tried again, then knocked on the door. Silence. Maybe she's with relatives, Nelson suggested. Or at work. Let's check the school. The detectives drove to the elementary school where Karen worked. The principal, a heavy-set, middle-aged woman, met them in her office. Karen hasn't been to work since Monday, she said. I thought it was because of her husband's death. Such a shock. Of course, I gave her unlimited time off. Did she call to explain why she wasn't coming in? No, but I didn't expect her to. Under the circumstances, it's understandable. Alarmed by the disappearance of their key witness, the detectives returned to the Joneses' house. This time, they walked around the building, looking in the windows. The house looked empty. No lights were on, and the curtains were drawn. Davis contacted the station and requested a search warrant. Given the circumstances of the case and the disappearance of the murdered man's wife, the judge granted permission within an hour. Entering the house with the help of a locksmith, the detectives immediately realized that Karen had indeed disappeared. The bedroom closet was half empty. Personal items, cosmetics, and some clothing were missing. A note lay on the bedside table. Mom, I'm sorry for everything. I can't live with this pain anymore. Sounds like a suicide note, Nelson remarked. Or an attempt to stage a suicide, Davis objected. Let's search the whole house. They methodically searched room after room. In Dominic's study, they found family photos, many of which had been torn up. The photos of the couple together were particularly badly damaged. In the living room, they found a broken frame with their wedding photo. Going down to the basement, the detectives found a small workshop with tools and shelves. Davis noticed one of the shelves. It looked newer than the others. Help me, she asked her partner. They removed the shelf and found a small niche in the wall behind it. Inside was a gun wrapped in a towel and a box of ammunition. A .38 caliber Browning, Nelson said, carefully picking up the gun by the barrel. It matches the description of the murder weapon. And hidden as if someone was preparing for a search, Davis added. Karen knew we were coming. The gun was sent for examination, and detectives issued a statewide search for Karen Jones. Her photos were sent to police stations in neighboring states, airports, and bus stations. Her bank accounts were also checked. She had withdrawn almost all of her cash the day before. Over the next 2 days, the search yielded no results. Karen seemed to have vanished into thin air. Meanwhile, forensic analysis confirmed that the gun found was the murder weapon used to kill Dominic Jones. Karen's fingerprints were found on it. On the morning of the third day, a call came in from the Nebraska police. Karen Jones had been detained at a gas station near Lincoln. She did not resist arrest and agreed to return to Iowa without extradition. Davis and Nelson met the convoy at the state border. Karen sat in the back seat of the police car, staring out the window with empty eyes. She had lost a lot of weight in the last few days. Her face was gaunt, and her eyes showed signs of exhaustion. At the station, she was placed in an interrogation room. Karen agreed to speak without a lawyer, saying she was ready to tell the whole truth. "Mrs. Jones, do you understand what you are accused of?" Davis asked, turning on the tape recorder. "Yes, of murdering my husband, and it's true." The simplicity of her confession struck even the experienced detectives. Usually, suspects deny their guilt until the very end, demand lawyers, and bargain. "Tell us what happened," Nelson asked gently. Karen closed her eyes, gathering her strength. "Dominic made me kill our baby, and then I found out why he did it." She opened her eyes and looked at the detectives. "I always dreamed of having children. When I found out I was pregnant, I was happier than ever. But Dominic, he said we weren't financially ready, that it would ruin his career." "Did you resist?" "Of course! I begged him to keep the baby, told him we could make it work, but he was adamant. He pressured me every day, coming up with new arguments. In the end, I broke down." Karen wiped away the tears that had welled up in her eyes with her sleeve. "After the abortion, I was in a terrible state. I couldn't eat, sleep, or work. Dominic said it would pass, that I would understand that we had made the right decision, but the pain only got worse." "And when did you find out about his affair?" 2 weeks ago. I saw messages on his phone while he was in the shower. There were messages from Nicole, plans for their future life together, and the worst thing was that he wrote to her that he would soon get rid of his problem wife." Karen's voice grew firmer, with a hint of anger. "I realized that he hadn't made me kill the baby for money or his career. He wanted to free himself from his family for the sake of his mistress. My child was just getting in the way of his plans." "What did you feel at that moment?" "Rage. A rage I had never felt before. This man had deceived me, made me kill my own child, and was planning to leave me for a young girl." Karen stood up and began to pace the room. "I couldn't think about anything else for 2 days. I imagined him telling her about our child, how they laughed at my naivety, and I decided he had to pay." "Tell me about the day of the murder." "I bought a gun from a friend. I said I wanted to protect the house after some recent burglaries in the neighborhood. I waited for the right moment." Karen returned to her chair and continued in an even voice. "On Monday, Dominic said he would be late from work. But I knew he was meeting her. I waited for him outside his office and said I wanted to talk to him. Dominic was surprised, but he agreed. Where did you talk? We drove to an old warehouse on the outskirts of town where he used to work. It was deserted, there was no one there. It was a strange place to talk, but he didn't say anything. I told him I knew about Nicole. Karen paused, and tears welled up in her eyes again. You know what he said? That he was glad everything had finally come out. That he was going to tell me himself over the weekend. He said I had to understand that it had been over between us for a long time. What about the abortion? I asked him directly. Did he make me get rid of the baby for Nicole? And he didn't even deny it. He said the baby would have complicated the divorce, that it was the right thing to do for everyone. Karen's voice became harsh. Right for everyone. He talked about our child as if it were an obstacle, and at that moment, I knew I was going to kill him. Did Dominic try to defend himself? He didn't even understand what was happening. He kept talking about the divorce, about how we would divide our property, and I took out the gun and shot him in the chest. Karen covered her face with her hands. He fell, and the last thing he said was, "Why?" And I replied, "For our child." What did you do after the shot? At first, I just stood there and looked at him. Then I realized I had to do something with the body. I loaded it into the trunk of my car and took it to a landfill. I thought they wouldn't find him there anytime soon. How did you behave at home? I went back, put the gun in the basement. I took a shower and went to bed. In the morning, I was even surprised at how calm I felt. But when we came to report your husband's death, you appeared to be in shock. I wasn't pretending. I was genuinely shocked that you found the body so quickly. I was hoping for more time to come up with an alibi. Why did you run away? I realized you were starting to suspect me when you started asking questions about Dominic's colleagues. I decided to disappear before it was too late. Karen raised her head and looked straight at the detectives. I don't regret what I did. Dominic was selfish and a liar. He made me kill a child for his own interests. People like that don't deserve to live. Mrs. Jones, do you understand the seriousness of your words? Completely. I am ready to take responsibility for my actions." Davis turned off the tape recorder. The confession was complete and detailed, leaving no doubt as to Karen Jones's guilt. The next day, the district attorney charged her with first-degree murder. Karen refused the services of a lawyer and stated her intention to plead guilty. A month later, the trial took place. Karen was sentenced to 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole. She sat calmly during the sentencing, showing no emotion. Detectives Davis and Nelson watched from the courtroom. After the sentence was handed down, they stepped outside the courthouse. "Tough case," Nelson said, looking up at the gray February sky. "Yeah," Davis agreed. But justice was served. The Dominic Jones case was closed. The police files contained the story of a man who, for personal gain, forced his wife to get rid of her child, and of a woman who avenged that loss. It was a story that showed how lies and selfishness can lead to tragedy. Nicole quit her law firm a week after Karen's arrest. She moved to another state, trying to start a new life. But the memory of her role in the tragedy haunted her for years. Dominic's mother and sister were devastated by what had happened. They couldn't understand how their beloved son and brother could have been so cruel. But gradually they began to realize that they didn't really know the real Dominic.